Hello, you're listening to podcast by two brothers, me Indrek and my brother Frederick. Here we ramble about philosophy, politics, meta thinking, and so on. Each episode, one of us chooses and prepares few pages on a topic that is supposed to inspire discussion. This time it was my turn, and the topic we discuss today is individualism and collectivism. All right. So maybe let's start by defining. Let's start with like dictionary definitions or something and then let's uh, work out from there because in my own thinking I see those terms. I use those terms much more
Do you also want to
broadly.
maybe give some background about how you came about this? Because, or at some point at least, because I
Yeah,
think it's a bit like, oh, individualism and collectivism. Well, let's do it.
yeah, actually I think why I've been thinking about it a lot recently is simply because I read Ayn Rand and that's it. So I recommend you reading it as well at some point. It's really fun, especially just literature books like Fountainhead. Um, uh, but there's that. So the simple definitions, right? Individualism. So a social theory favoring freedom of action for individuals over collective or state control. Okay, so this is, I think this is something that uh, most people relate to or think about when speaking the word individualism. And collectivist is like, it's basically the opposite of it. It's like a social theory. You could say that it's a social theory that favoring, well, collective and state control over the freedom of individuals, basically. So it's like the main thing is in historically is like, you know, communism, where you would like to collectivize the ownership of land and property and means of production and so on. And now the thing with that is,
Well, it's
yeah,
just, if I were to read out the definition, actually, it's like the ownership of land and the means of production by the people or the state as political principle or system. Or uh, collectivism as the practice of principle of giving a group priority over each individual in it. And also a more sort of humanitarian approach to individualism, I think, is like the habit or principle of being independent and self-reliant. So I think
yeah.
there's
So
also this kind of political definitions to it of kind of state control and that kind of thing. Or lack of state control, and then there's maybe the more sort of personal level definitions of it.
uh, so so first, yes, these definitions, they really are about like a worldview, I think. But then I think there's a second way is like, it's sort of like an attitude. You can have an individualistic attitude or a collectivistic attitude, I think. It's like if you have an individualistic attitude, it's like probably think that everyone are responsible of their own mistakes and well also uh, they should also reap the rewards of their productivity and so on. And when you have a collectivist attitude, is like then you probably, well, nowadays it's more like, okay, I think you want to have safety nets, socialized democracy and so on. And when reading like the Fountainhead, so I really got the feeling that uh, that this collectivism or this individualistic attitudes, they used to be much more extreme, like before in the early 20th century. So like if you talk about communist revolution or uh, or the Ayn Rand's objectivists, they are much more extreme than what we see around us nowadays. Don't you think?
Mm, yeah, I mean, probably. I think, well, I mean, I think partly because majority of the world, even the countries that sort of claim to be communist or maybe have a slightly more collectivist ideology, have all kind of embraced capitalism in one form or another, and sort
Yeah.
of are pulled into that game whether they like it or not, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like China is now very capitalistic, though they have still like they have dictatorship. Okay, it's like they have state intervention, but this is, I wouldn't say it's like a collectivist. It's anything to do with collectivism. It's more to do with
No,
power
not
games
at
and
all.
so on.
It's just
Yeah.
completely a top-down system where everything
Yes.
is
So if you
decided
look
by the
at
party.
yeah, so Scandinavia, it's just a social democracy. So it's actually very liberal, very open market, capitalistic, and so on. And so they have just some values. Okay, that we want to have a welfare state, we want to have safety nets, and so on. But in general, the people are acting as free market actors.
Although I think a distinction has to be made between how people take part in the economy versus how they take part in other aspects of their life. So I do. Well, I don't know if it's actually the case because I'm not like an expert on China or something. But I totally see that it's possible that even though as a, let's say, Chinese citizen or whatever, you take part in this economy and that's all fine, but in your sort of community life or the way you organize in a neighborhood or just the way you, I don't know, deal with your family or friends or that like elements of this maybe less individualistic life come through. But I am not, I mean, I don't know, but I see it's for sure possible that happened.
Okay, wait, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's also like if you look at Scandinavia, I mean, of course, they're like inherently capitalist, right? It's undeniable. But at the same time, their governments also embrace like a very strong welfare system where education is free, healthcare is free. There is all of these things that are sort of done for the benefit of the collective by the state. Let's see.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you could phrase it like that. Um, okay, but so I guess where I wanted to get to is uh, that at the earliest 20th century there was this. You could really draw a distinction between some pure forms of collectivism or individualism or so on. Uh, and nowadays, I think everyone kind of agrees that the pure forms don't work. Uh, and that there's so there's some kind of balance. Okay, that there is like some uh, certain underlying truths of all those different approaches have been mixed and matched, and there's some kind of balance. But there are many different kinds of balances. And I would argue that, for example, Ayn Rand, who is considered very individualistic, even her philosophy is just a combination uh, of things, and it's still only relativistically individualistic. It's more individualistic than most other approaches, but that we are that actually we are just talking about relativistic individualism and collectivism when we talk about like the world today. And so why I think that, okay, this so how I see it, okay, so previous we also discussed this topic a little bit, and I think I messed up with the wording a little bit, but what I was getting to is that there are some underlying dimensions of strength that motivate emphasizing either of those attitudes. So this attitude is like having an individualistic attitude or a collectivistic attitude. Okay, and so okay, so this dimensions, what I'm talking about. So first one is like complex decision making. Okay, then something that's very related to is innovation and creativity. Then you have morale and motivation. Okay, cohesion and cooperation, and perhaps also risk management in general. So I think this is, so do you have some like questions, and what do you think about that? Look confused.
Well, I mean, I totally understand what you mean, but I'm compared to what time then is the individualism and collectivism relative? I mean, I think it's always been relative to some other time, right? Mm-hmm. And probably why it appears that when we because when we say individualism, I think most people understand that we are not referring to the extreme and like the total extreme end of the spectrum, where there is completely no government at all, and you're just all out for yourself, and you get no support from anybody. I think it's clear that that is not sort of the world that you kind of attribute to, right? Exactly. But at the same time, I'm also not sure when that word would have been used to kind of refer to that barbaric of a world, maybe.
Yeah, it's okay. That's a good point.
Although it could also be that individualism has always had this sort of quite middle ground, towards the individualist ideology, but still never really referring to such an extreme. But at some point, of course, there was like this communist kind of movement, right, with Karl Marx and like what Lenin was up to, and this kind of experiment that didn't really work out. So you could argue that, okay, maybe this collectivism phrase was kind of taken to the extreme at one point, or at least people attempted to take it to the extreme, right? I'm not sure. Well, at least if you look at modern history, I don't think we've ever tried to really take individualism to such an extreme.
No, obviously not. Yes. But so maybe I. But
I mean, that's sort of a hunter-gatherer kind of vibe, you know.
Yeah. But what do you think about these dimensions of strength?
Well, let's start with the first one.
So complex decision making, and I don't know. Do you see a connection of this having to with having either of those attitudes? Like, do you think there is a relevant connection?
Maybe you can give an example of a complex decision, and then I can try to approach it from two different sides.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, for example, suppose you have an iron mine in some region, like Switzerland. Okay, you have iron mines in. And then mm, so you mine it, and now what you're gonna, so who you're going to sell it to, or who you're going to trade it to, or give it to, or things like that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you go completely collectivist, then you would not sell at all, right? You would just use it as a material.
Yeah. But
For the people.
it's like, okay, it sounds like a dumb example, because right now you'd say, okay, well, what's the market price, and you will just sell it at the best price you can, probably, right? Of course, it's much more complex because you have the logistic expenses. So it's like, okay, actually selling to someone mm, at a higher price might not as actually be beneficial, because you also have to bring the resource there as well. But this is actually one great example of I think why the Western capitalistic societies outcompeted the Soviet Union, was that uh, basically managing the materials and resources at a larger scale, because they were doing it like a planned economy. And while okay, in the West we have the market systems, but what really was going on is that uh, what the market does is it decentralizes decision making, meaning that instead of one person having to plan out all this complex system, a lot of people plan out few simple operations and they optimize those.
This is
And
actually
so
the sort of the I sometimes find this to be the ultimate irony of modern capitalism, where
mhm,
the power structures are so decentralized that in the end we have examples where through, well, because that was kind of this utopian idea of communism, right? That we would just share everything and there would be no central power to control life, whatever.
mhm,
But now also, like in the Netherlands, like everyone has these rented bikes that are all the same orange color with the blue front wheel, and we have car sharing, and we all go to Starbucks to get the coffee and do
mhm,
H&M to buy our clothes. And in a way, it's almost ironic how this capitalist approach is contributing to this society where individualist approach becomes harder and harder because yeah, well, just because we're all buying more or less the same products and whatever. I mean, it's of course it's a bit more complicated than that, because I think the ultimate individualism becomes from like this more meta concepts like freedom to think and like how we function in a democracy and etc. But well, I don't know. I'm getting a bit off track, but just I find sometimes the two extremes can also start to look very similar, almost. Like on a very surface level.
but so here's the thing, I don't think this what you described was is like a feature specific to capitalism. Like often I think we um, so it's possible that okay, there's some company or like some techniques are more efficient, and so in a free market they become widely used. So basically, like for example, clothes will all look kind of the same because they're made in a similar way, something like that. But but this is, I don't think it's like a specific to capitalism. like it's not and I'm not even sure if that's the case, because I think there's
Well, I know
plenty of options.
it's totally not specific to capitalism. It's only that
Yeah.
I think capitalism is often viewed as like the friend of this individualist mindset, right?
Mm.
And I think it can
Yes,
often
that's
lead
correct.
to situations where capitalism is actually working against individualism, because we are all becoming, because like the kind of the systems of capitalism are becoming so globalized that we are all taking
Mm-hmm.
part in some of the same elements, no matter where we live, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like if you at some point there would have been like a massive difference between Estonia and the Netherlands, you know. And now it's basically like everyone uses the same technology, the same equipment. We swipe basically the same
Mm-hmm.
cards
Mm-hmm.
in public transport, you know, all this kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
like the kind of well, I don't even know how to describe it really. Can't find a good word
Yeah.
for it,
Okay,
but
I
I think
get it.
you
Like for example, Estonia, it doesn't make sense to have a car manufacturer in Estonia, for example, because it's unless it can also compete in the outer markets, the local market would be too small to have any chance with competing, uh, well, imported cars, basically.
yeah, I mean that's also the thing. And also like if you talk
Yeah.
about cars, then so many of the European car manufacturers are owned by Volkswagen. And even if you buy
Mhm.
I don't know, if you buy an Audi or you buy like a Volkswagen, you find like the same buttons in the cars and whatever. And even though you're thinking you're subscribing to like this different
Okay.
brand and this different ideology, it's all like kind of manufactured in the
No,
same plant.
I
And
don't
then
know.
they
I
just,
don't know if anyone thinks or how many people think that. But okay.
wow, come on. I think brand identity is super important when it comes to these manufacturers, right?
Yeah,
And
maybe so. Okay, but so coming back, okay, complex decision making. So why do I think that it's relating to those dichotomies or these attitudes? Um, so yeah, I think
well,
it's mostly
no,
to
go
do,
ahead.
yeah,
No,
it's
go ahead. I
mostly
thought you
to
were
do,
thinking, but you are talking now, so go.
yeah, I think it's mostly to do with the fact that um, you want, when you have like this really big complex systems, then you want to decentralize them, right? So how do you do that? Okay. Um, so you could just, you have a complex task. Okay, you partition it somehow, and you give it out to 100 people to solve. Okay, that would be like some kind of a management or something like that. So who's to tell that which partition is good, right? Uh, how do you know that your partition is even good? And then how do you make sure that those who solve the parts of the problem, this complex problem, like for example, you have big global supply chains. Okay, how do you make sure that this is solved optimally, right? And so here, this individualistic attitude really helps, because you say that, well, you don't know for sure, but you let different individuals, try out their solutions, which they believe into, which they believe in. and you see which individuals provide the best solution. Okay, so that's the market, right? And those who provide the best solutions, they should reap some rewards for it. Okay, because then it's more likely that, okay, they will also provide better solutions down the line. Okay, so they should have resources to actually have the right to do make such decisions. Okay, so
Yeah, I mean,
that's when
obviously that is how it's kind of supposed to work, right? But there's also, I mean, it's very important. It's very difficult to, of course, define what the best solution kind of is. And okay, you can say that the best solution is whatever the most amount of individuals subscribe to, but then, okay, then we get into this topic of like,
that's what we don't say. We say the best solution is whatever gets us the same result with least cost. That's usually what we say.
Yeah, but I mean, usually people, I mean, if you think of a product and you have, okay, like you have a couple of these companies, I don't know, you have a problem to solve that, well, I don't know, they need to make a cup for people to drink out of, and then these companies make different versions, and then the market, sort of like the people that participate in the market decide like which one of the products is superior, and they show their support by actually buying it, right? But of course, I mean, this is maybe getting a little bit into like this entire critique of democracy and sort of a capital markets, but the people that participate in the market are, of course, not always basing their choices or their consumer choices where, you know, they don't have the best information to actually or like they don't have enough information to actually make a choice that really is the best, let's say.
So I think the cup example is maybe too off, but a good example is, okay, like eating outside, all right? And suppose you want to eat healthily outside. Okay, so how do you know who is making their food in the healthiest way? Because usually what often they can do is, like, for example, for Chinese food and all stuff, but they just put something, sweeteners or sugar and something like that, and you say, oh, it tastes good.
Yeah, or how
so
like the candy manufacturers put these chemicals into the candies that kind of trick your brain into thinking that it tastes good instead of actually, you know.
Yeah, it's exactly. So it's like the problem there is, like, if you want to eat healthily, but your main feedback is that, okay, something tastes good or something tastes bad, and they are not always they're not always sort of aligned, especially when it's like when you're buying takeout food or something like that. Then then it's like, you as an individual, what do you do? Okay, it's like, yes, there is free market, yes, they are competing with them, but you often do. So there's quite, what I'm trying to say is that there's quite a substantial hidden cost to figuring out what is the best option for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And most of the time we make, or not, let's say most of the time, but very often we make the wrong decision.
Absolutely, yes. And that is already when you take into account that you actually want to eat healthily, okay, which should be good for you, and you should want to do that. But
okay, maybe the eating healthy example is also a bit like it makes sense, but at the same time, here, at least the positive thing about this is that if you make the wrong choice, you're basically only ruining your own health, right? So in a way,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter because I don't really care that much about other people because we're all inherently somewhat selfish, right?
Yeah.
But what happens when, well, I mean, you can also make the same example with food, that if you're really consuming a lot of fast food, you're actually, you're contributing to like this system of wasting resources, because fast food is made in a very environmentally damaging way, whatever.
Well, I don't know about that. Yeah, but maybe.
But let's see, what would be a better example? Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know enough about it. I guess we could talk about veganism like this, or not eating meat. That is sort of a, but maybe an easier example is just like, well, whether you buy like a diesel car or a hydrogen or electric car or whatever.
Okay.
Something like this. Or maybe let's say whether you fly or whether you take the train. That's also like for myself, probably like assuming I'm going from one end of Europe to the other, okay, then taking the plane is probably quicker.
Yes.
Most likely. Well, actually, almost certainly.
Yes, it's
but maybe
quicker.
in the grand scheme of things, taking the train is actually a better idea, provided that the electricity for the train is produced in a renewable fashion.
Okay. So now you're talking about basically the ecological concerns. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So provided that the electricity for the train is produced renewably, and also that the materials that were used to make the train are, well, at least not more polluting than the airplane.
Okay. So how does that relate to the previous topic? Complex decision making.
Well, I mean, it creates this, like, depending on your ideology, like where you fit in this spectrum of individualism or collectivism, then, you know, you can say, like, obviously for me right now in this moment, the plane is the superior choice. But if you take into account, let's say, the whole of the European population, and you also maybe take into account the future and how your current actions contribute to the well-being of others.
Should an individual take these things into account? And can an individual take these things into account reasonably? I don't think they can.
Well, of course, why not?
Well, because
I mean, not from a position of zero information. No, that's not possible, of course.
Yes. So, for example, already this assumption that this train electricity that is used by the train is 100% sort of carbon neutral or something like that. Okay. So suppose it's not the case, that it's not 100%, because at some places it's you know, you have coal plants providing electricity, like Germany, for example, and then
yeah, but still, this is quite.
Then it's all of a sudden it's not so clear, right?
But
so the differences might be actually much smaller.
I agree, but at the same time, it's a very easy problem to fix, because this is not, for me as a customer or as a traveler, it's quite difficult to calculate, possibly.
Exactly.
But for the train operators, it's very easy to calculate that, probably. So if you also, like, if we live in this democratic Europe and like we decide democratically that the train operators have to show on each ticket the carbon footprint so that the customers can make the most accurate choice, and also the planes, of course, like every traveling thing has to do that. Then it becomes very easy, you know, to also add that to the decision making process, let's say.
Okay, but yeah. So we can talk about that, because so my thoughts on it is that first, if only some individuals make this choice, okay, and other individuals don't make the choice, they make a choice that is more beneficial to them, right? In the terms of monetary or time values, right? Then first of all, it doesn't have that huge of an impact, and I don't think that individuals should make such choices that, okay, I should put my own self-interest sort of, or I should put some potential large ecological concerns ahead of my self-interest, which, I mean, the ecological concerns are important, but as an individual, if you start to do that, okay, again, it's like you will never have the perfect information, even if they do this calculations, all this stuff for you. Second is, this is a wrong incentive structure. It's like you are basically saying that, okay, every single individual has to for some reason just agree to it. Okay, so
no, I mean, I don't necessarily
yeah.
say that it's like a good idea, right? I think if we talk about climate change, just relying on the individuals to make the correct choices is quite a disastrous way.
That's absurd, I would say.
You know, solving the problem, right? At the same time, I still think that enabling the individual to make choices with the most amount of information as practically possible is always a good idea.
But okay, so here's what I actually would propose, okay, is so we already have like some kind of carbon tax, but okay, so what should the carbon tax be, right? So because we want to be carbon neutral, so whenever we are doing something that creates carbon dioxide, okay, so we ask, well, do we have some ways to take carbon dioxide out of the air, and what is the price of it? And I think in the future we are going to have those ways. Right now it doesn't make sense, but
that seems like the only way to fix this problem, actually.
Exactly, that's the only way to fix this problem. But to do that, we significantly need to increase our green energy output. But once we do that, okay, then we start to have some ways to actually take carbon dioxide out from the atmosphere, basically, or reduce the levels. And that's going to have some kind of price, and that price is going to be tied to the carbon tax. And then once you are able to basically apply this carbon tax accurately, okay, to all the industries that use it, you're going to have the correct sort of prices. You say that, okay, now if I take I buy a plane ticket, right? Then this is already in the plane ticket's price, and so you don't need any extra information aside from what something costs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean that's even better.
Yes, and that's actually
although I think it's still good to I mean, I still think including this information is beneficial, because even though capitalists like to think that we are all rational decision makers and we just buy things based on the cost and benefit or whatever, I still think that emotionally, like reading this ticket, like for example, if the price difference is not that big, like if it's, I don't know, 25 euro or something, but you see that on one ticket, like let's say the train is cheaper, but the plane is so much quicker. So you're like, okay, oh, maybe I just pay the 20 euro extra, like fuck it, you know? If you see that also like what amount of that price is comes from the carbon destruction, basically.
Carbon tax.
Well, the carbon tax, yeah. Then you might be persuaded to still kind of suck it up and take a little bit more time for the travel and, you know, whatever.
Yeah, but then you won't be, because actually the carbon won't be anymore a problem, because this carbon tax is used exactly to take the same amount of carbon dioxide out from the atmosphere. So it's like you won't have any, like basically you won't have any guilt about it. Okay, because this system works. There's gonna be some actions that just you're going to throw some CO2 to the system, right? And there is no way around.
I understand what you mean. So you're saying that through the carbon tax, we're funding the subtraction of the carbon itself afterwards.
Yeah, because the only reason we consider emitting carbon dioxide to the atmosphere is that this is leading to a ecological disaster, and this is bad, right? That's the only reason we are considering. If we have active measures to mitigate that, that's no longer a problem. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that is of course a very active measure, right? I mean,
yes, of course.
Because
I think that's what we want to get to it. I think this we have to go past carbon neutrality. Okay, we have to go past.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that the carbon tax is not usually used like this. Like normally the carbon
tax. Right now,
it's
not used like this because it actually doesn't make sense. Right now, we are just using it only to incentivize certain green solutions, and it will never make sense like that before we are able to have an output of energy that is larger output of green energy, sorry, before we have output of green energy that is larger than what we use, so that we have spare energy to use some techniques to get the carbon dioxide outside from us atmosphere. And before we have that, even if 5% of our energy output is like burning coal or something like that, even then it doesn't make sense to spend any energy on getting the CO2 out of the atmosphere, I think.
Yeah. Well,
so
maybe.
But I mean, that's actually positive, because if you look at the solar and stuff like that, then the problem with solar is that at some peak hours you have such extra energy. So what do? Well, maybe that's what you're going to do in the future. Maybe that's what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, that's possible. Okay, but I think it's interesting.
We went so off a topic.
Yeah, we went super off topic, but it's fine. I don't mind at all. But what's interesting is like we're starting from this individualist mindset, like, okay, you have this problem of traveling, right? And then as an individual, I'm supposed to make a choice that is sort of mostly whatever is most convenient for me. And for some individuals, this contribution to the environment is so important that it's more convenient to also take the train, because you don't have to live with the guilt of polluting, I don't know, whatever. But what's interesting is that we come from this like individual position, and then we say like, okay, like democratically, or let's say collectively, then we need to kind of come together and draw up some reforms that either give the individual more information to make this choice better, or to really really in the price of the product itself make clear the ecological consequences.
Yes. So that's what you're doing with the carbon tax. You're regulating the market, saying
Yeah.
that, aha, you have to take this into account when you're pricing.
So
And
then,
you take it to account through tax.
so then also from this collective position, again, we go back to the individual with this heightened sense of information, or simply a heightened idea of what the product actually entails. The individual is supposed to be able to make a better choice. What's interesting is that both of these strategies are happening pretty much simultaneously all the time. And also what's interesting is that, like, when we talk about, like, oh, are we a collectivist society or are we an individualist society or like whatever, like, in a way we are both at this, like, you know, we exist on very different spectrums depending on which institution you're talking about, or which problem you're talking about, or which time of day you're talking about. Like, the balance is constantly shifting around, depending on the problem, depending on the time, depending on the people involved, etc. I think this is quite nice, because it also means that, well, it's nice because it ties back to this idea of, like, the relative individualism and collectivism. Maybe we can even take it a step further to say that there is this kind of fluctuation happening all the time, and there is no set balance that we have kind of decided upon. But we are almost so pragmatic in our societies that we are always sort of finding, or that just depending on the issue at hand, the balance is always changing in that sense. Do you know what I mean? Or is this very confusing?
Yes, sort of. Yeah, I think I understand what you mean. So it really depends. So I think the underlying, like, if you have some underlying principles for your operation, right, or some meta philosophy, then these principles or this meta philosophy will probably not change much depending on the situation. And so what you're trying to say is that for example, the amount of cooperation I need to do depending on the situation is different. And I have probably some kind of meta philosophy or some principles to charge it based on any particular situation or time of day, like you said, right? And so it's like, but it doesn't change my attitude, like general attitude. It just says that,
you could then say that the meta philosophy is that we live in a democratic society or something, and that's also why we have every 5 years or something, we have a little bit of a shift in political parties, which is like the sort of a little bit smaller
meta philosophics
level.
Yes, you have some kind of widespread meta philosophies, but in the end, every individual themselves has a very specific meta philosophy, very specific to them, or some kind of a specific understanding, a version of some more widespread meta philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, of course, everything is sort of interpreted a little bit.
Yeah. But yeah, so, but now we went super off topic, or like off track to what I planned originally. Because I wanted to talk about the underlying dimensions of strength that I think motivate emphasizing either of those attitudes, right? And so we talked about complex decision making. Actually, we talked a lot about it. And I think something that is very related to it is like this innovation and creativity. And again, it's an area which I think having an individualistic attitude helps making better innovation, but to a certain degree. It's like, because it's
Well,
important, it's relativistic.
I
Because
think it helps.
when we discussed before, okay,
I mean, I think here it's
yeah,
sort of, the big question is like, in what field are you trying to be innovative and creative, right? Uh,
doesn't matter.
I think it does matter, because there's a big difference between whether you're creating a product that is going to be used,
Mm-hmm.
or whether you're, I don't know, making
Creating
a theater
art.
performance or something like this.
Okay.
I don't think the processes for making those things are, or let's say the creative process of making those things is sort of entirely the same.
Yes. And so maybe so, but I think one of, like, previously we also discussed it, I think on Friday, and what I understood is, so you pointed out that you can make innovation in a group, and that's correct, right? So that's why what I'm saying is, actually there is some relative individualism, actually, what I'm talking about, because at some point you're saying it, okay, I have very original ideas and so on, but actually now it becomes much more efficient for me to share those ideas, to
I think my
cooperate.
point wasn't only that you can be
Mm-hmm.
creative in a group, but that when you take the average people, let's
Mm-hmm.
say when you exclude the people that are so genius in their own brain that they don't need anyone
Mm-hmm.
else to make amazing stuff, if you take those people away for a second and you just focus on sort of, let's say, a more average company or whatever, then I think my point is that you can probably be more creative in a group than any of the people individually are able to be.
Maybe, yes, but again, it's like there's so many questions for me. It's like, is being average inherent? Is there any reason you're inherent, or like you're average? Like, could it be, yeah, like there's a lot of things that I specifically don't know about regarding that. But
Yeah, but
I think, and what you
always.
said, okay, that okay, even for geniuses, at some point, if they are able to cooperate with other very independent thinkers, very creative thinkers, they're able to cooperate and mirror each other's ideas, uh, then that's also going to um, sort of help them get to a next level. Often that's at least how I intuited. And
Yeah.
and so there is some kind of balance. Okay, it's like, so you have this attitude, okay, that I want to be a free original mind, but this attitude is very relative, probably, of everything around you. Okay, because you can't go this, push it to the extreme. And so you will have an implicit underlying sort of, like, for example, that is, you still want to have some cohesion, you want to use the same language as everyone else, you want to cooperate, okay, at some point.
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. Mm, I mean, if you
And so,
only, like, complete exclusion from the rest of society is not very healthy, probably.
yes, so it's very important to distinguish individualism, or like, well, actually, I don't know if it's important to distinguish, but it's like isolationism is still bad, regardless if you're like you think yourself as an individualist or collectivist or whatever. Isolation is bad either way, right?
Yeah.
And so so we arrived at that there's actually these two terms are very relativistic, and we are actually seeking a good balance for ourselves. Balance of how much we want to cooperate with other people, how much we are willing to accept some kind of meta rules that are set by the society at large, or like some groups.
I mean, or maybe doesn't even have to be meta rules. I think it can also just be very
specific,
like
rules.
obvious rules, like the law, or you know, it's like we've collectively decided somehow, I guess not really, but through some sort of democratic institutions, we've decided that the speed limit should be like, I don't know, 90 or whatever. But in my quest to feel free and individual and control of my own life, I often ignore that, you know.
Now, do you? Shouldn't admit it on a podcast.
Well, this is a family problem, huh? So what are you gonna do? No, I don't actually. Never mind. Only in Eastern Europe where there's no speed cameras.
What are you talking about? Jesus Christ. Oh, no. So, dimensions of strength.
No, but I think the beautiful thing about like this kind of individualist attitude is that you can sort of understand the laws and customs as they are, but through this, I don't know, you just have this, like, you just know that you have certain principles, and maybe you are also self-aware that you know you have certain capabilities.
Yeah.
And through that, you simply decide to not like kind of conform to these laws, let's say. And it's fine. You probably, nothing will happen to you.
To a certain extent, yes, for sure. But it's like if you push it too much, you're going to get into conflict with other people. And so that's going to actually be against your self-interest. So
definitely. But I mean,
that's how things should balance out.
I mean, more in like the petty things, kind of.
Exactly. Yeah, I get it.
Which is, we can talk about this later, but that's also a little bit what my thesis is about, actually.
Okay. Okay, so let's continue with third thing I listed was morale and motivation. Okay, and here it's like from one hand, right, you have from the individualist the attitudes, you have the incentive structures, like you make a good job, you get paid well, right? Ideally, okay. And then, but from the other hand, it's like, so that's actually good for morale from one perspective. But the other thing is like many people value safety or sort of so this also ties to the risk management. So maybe some people might even not like to have this kind of very direct feedback. I don't know. What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is like the question of like this kind of morality and things. It also happens.
No, I'm talking about morale. So that It's like more motivation and being motivated, that kind of morale, like morale of armies. Not
that kind of thing.
not ethics, not morality, like the ethical.
Yeah, I mean, very conflicted thoughts about this in a sense, because I also think that for a large part of what we do, like what job we take or whatever, we choose it based on kind of selfish principles of what is the salary,
Yes.
what is the benefits, are the co-workers nice enough, whatever. But at the same time, I also think it's very difficult to live a meaningful life without having a sort of larger goal in mind in how you are contributing to society. I mean, at least for me, it's a bit like if you are only selfish and creating a good life for yourself, I think you live quite an empty life in the end.
Maybe in some sense, yes, but okay, continue.
Yeah, but I mean, in some sense it's enough, right? Because to have like this holistic experience, you also need this nice balance between providing for yourself and your family, but at the same time kind of, first of all, being at peace with the fact that you're not exploiting anyone else by having all of these things, and that you're also sort of contributing, or that you are in also some way giving back or contributing to the community or whatever. I mean, I think for me that's very important, but that's also maybe a personal thing. I can imagine that for a lot of people it's completely fine to just have the big house and the 2 cars and a nice dog and happy days, you know.
No. Okay, first of all, okay, having meaning in your life. Okay, for me specifically, it's one of my self-interest. Okay, having meaning in my life is just important. Okay. So first of all, that's why there is no contradiction. It's like, so what I meant by, okay, in some sense, is that depending what you mean by selfishness, you can be selfish in a very irrational way, in a very bad way, and then your statement was true, right? You can spend a considerable amount of time thinking about what your principles should be, what your philosophy should be, what your self-interest should be, or interest in general, like things you want. What are the things you should want, right? Not should, but what you want. What is good? You can spend a considerable amount of time doing that, and you can arrive very sort of, you can arrive to very meaningful goals. Okay. And so now it's like, well, I want to contribute or give something back to the world. Okay. But how do I know that what I'm giving back to the world is valuable? Right?
Yeah, but I mean, I know what you're trying to get at, but I mean, if that is the way you want to approach decision making, then only basically, I mean, of course, like how do you measure your contribution? Like whether it was actually net positive or net negative? Yeah, it's probably impossible, but I think most people have some sort of an intuitive feeling of what can be beneficial and what not. And of course, there's controversial things where there's one group of people that's fighting for something, and there's another group of people that's fighting for exactly the opposite of that, and they're both equally passionate that their contribution is the noble one, right? But I think there's also a large amount of things or improvements to society that we can make that will be quite universally accepted as positive. And of course, we're, basing is again like this lack of information of like, okay, maybe we think it's positive now, but in 50 years we have more information, and then it turns out that it was negative. That's possible, but
yeah. So why have this critique?
If you take your hesitation to such an extent, then the only thing you can do is just do nothing.
Oh no, that's not hesitation. It's like, because, for example, if I get paid for something, then I know that it's valuable, at least for that person, right? If I, for example, I don't know, if someone appreciates it and I feel appreciated, then I know that what I did was valuable. Okay.
Yeah.
So even in charity, it's like, okay, I want to, so for example,
should I give like an utopian example maybe?
Oh wait, let me finish just quick, and then you can do it. Okay, so for example, in charity, it's like I have some goal. I want to improve someone's life. Okay, like there's I don't know, some homeless kid or homeless person in general. So it's like, well, I just want to see a world where this change has been enacted somehow. And so I would say, well, how would I see it? Okay, so it's like maybe in 5 years, if I help some, like maybe for a period of 1-2 months, something like that, work with them, I don't know, like I participate in some charity. Okay, so the question is, does the life change? So what is that person doing in 5-6 years? Okay, and if it's still in the same place or even worse, then it's like, maybe this charity actually wasn't valuable. Okay, maybe.
I think that's the general problem with giving money to charities, is that usually we just do it to make ourselves feel good, not to make like an active contribution. Like
exactly. So this yeah, so first of all, it's shallow. Okay, right? It has a danger to be shallow. Okay, now not all charities are dysfunctional. Some of them work.
Well, it's not about the charity itself. It's more like for the motivation of giving your money to any charity. Like,
yeah, okay. But no, I mean, I think it's very important whether it's functional or not. I think that's very crucial.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously, but it almost goes without saying, I think.
Yeah, and so even because if it's functional, then I don't think there's much difference whether you contribute by money or by labor or some other means, right? If they are all being converted successfully to some value, okay, the goals, okay, the reason for this.
I mean, I think the problem is that well, the only criticism I would have of this would be like, okay, but not all people have the means to give to charity, right?
Sure.
And if the sort of most popular way to contribute is through just giving money to something, it also excludes maybe the possibility of contributions to society for like a group of people that cannot afford to do that, right? So then there also have to be some other ways of doing things for your community.
Yeah, but I mean, if you can't afford to, then you should. Yeah, but why should you give to charity if you can't afford to? Like then you have your own life, like that you have to set in order, right?
Yeah, but I mean, setting your life in order doesn't have to necessarily have anything to do with how much money you have, right? I mean, you can do well enough for yourself that you're happy and you still want to contribute, but you cannot contribute monetarily.
Okay, so you can contribute in some other ways then.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
But maybe an utopian example would be like,
Okay.
so if you think of like, this is a bit off topic, but it's kind of a fun thing to think about, I think. So if you think like, okay, we want to have world peace, let's say, we don't have to have any wars anymore, at least not ones where one person is directly killing another. Well, one way to probably the best way to do it, or at least one way to do it, is to get rid of all the armies ever. Like no country has an army anymore. Okay, so then going to the army is usually seen as this quite proud thing. Like this is really a significant contribution to the nation of serving in the military.
Okay.
You could say that, okay, let's say out of all the potential people that were eligible to join the army, if somehow it would be, it's so utopian, it's almost like ridiculous. But what if, what happened if what happened if no one was just willing to join the army anymore because the moral argument of, let's say, world peace, but through eliminating all the militaries, would be superior to the one where you're like, okay, it's good to serve my country by doing this military service thing. I mean, that is kind of like this, it's just an example, you know, like both.
Okay, but what are you trying to show with this example,
I think what I'm trying to show is that it's like normally doing military service is considered quite an honorable thing, and avoiding military service is considered normally quite a dishonorable thing.
Yes.
But at the same time, if everybody did the dishonorable thing, it wouldn't be possible to have an army anymore for anyone, which might be net positive.
Yes, but then we get back to the same problem that like massive amount of people don't magically decide to do a choice X, which they have no reason to do, like pragmatic reasons.
Yeah, not immediately, but let's say if we started to do this campaign, this worldwide campaign, and we kept it up for years and years and years, then maybe in 50 years we would be in that situation, you know?
No, that's utopian, I agree.
I think it's possible. It's not going to happen probably, but I mean, the likelihood is very small, but
this is something, it won't happen. If it will happen, I don't think it will be because of moral reasons. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah. Well, definitely not only because of moral reasons. That's true.
Yes. I think there has to be some kind of pragmatic component to it, why it actually makes sense.
Probably also an economic component eventually.
Yes. I think economic factor is potentially very, very big.
And I think that's also probably why we have, you know, even though there are still wars and things, like we have so much less war than we used to, because at some point we realized like, oh, it's actually more beneficial for us to cooperate and sell each other stuff instead.
Exactly. We have globalized economy. That means waging war is really bad for you. It's like basically unless actually, even look, I don't think that US is making any profit from those wars. Okay, I don't think. I think they are,
Well, the
even
country
though
as a
they are,
whole,
yes,
possibly not, but the military-industrial
definitely.
complex is
Definitely.
definitely big, cashing in big time, and these are the people in
Yes,
power,
I
right?
think
And there is a
that
huge
is
conflict of
correct.
interest there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good example of how you say,
Corruption.
collectivizing the downside while privatizing the profits.
Yeah, pretty
uh,
much.
well.
I mean, you have a situation where the Congress is basically saying, or no, not the Congress, but the Defense Department is saying, like, yo, you guys are giving us too much money. We have nothing to do with this. And they're just like shoving it in their throats. Buy more stuff.
Oh no. Oh no.
What was your... Oh, maybe an interesting point to move on to from this is like, or how would you wrap this up?
Yeah, how would I wrap this up? So,
I mean, this moral and motivation thing, I think it's, well, I don't know. It's funny, right? Because I think as individuals, we are quite selfish and we're sort of looking out for our own lives. But at the same time, of course, all of these, let's say, collectivist policies that we have healthcare for everyone and education and whatever, on an individual level, you get so much out of that kind of system. So again, it's like this is almost this weird situation where most of us are probably programmed to be quite selfish, but at the same time, we would benefit a lot if we aren't all the time selfish.
Yeah, I think it's like I think that's one of the troubles I have with Ayn Rand and all his sort of followers is that they are, so when they talk about selfish, they already have these assumptions that there's very certain good rationality tied with it. Okay, and so I think that's the problem. Like it's like,
no, there's a difference between rational and selfish, I think.
Yes, but it's like if you are like a kid and you small child and you don't care about other things, just care about you getting some candy or something like that, then you can act really really annoyingly, right? And so over time you learn that, okay, you should consider other people's feelings, right? And then you find out that actually it's also beneficial for you to do that, because then other people will sort of treat you better, right? And so it's like, so considering other people and being willing to cooperate with them, right? There's no contradiction with having self-interest and working based on your self-interest, right? There is no contradiction. And so it's
Yeah,
like,
but in these kinds of personal examples, it's of course you see the change in behavior of the other reflected in how you yourself behave, right? But of
yes,
course, if you bring it bigger, then everyone sort of agrees that we should have education or whatever. Or
yes,
maybe
exactly.
not everyone even doesn't, but okay, let's just say that we do. But of
And
course,
what
my family doesn't get the benefit out of like all types of education that are out there. You know, some of it might seem pointless for me. Like, I don't know, like mathematicians, like who cares about accountants, right? It's like, oh no, they're actually important. But for me, like,
Okay, but here's the thing. So that's why democracy is so brilliant, right? Is well,
is it though?
Yeah, kind of is. So consider public education or like free education for everyone, right? So it's gonna cost a lot of money, and I have to pay taxes for it. But at the same time, do I benefit that my children will get public education? Yes. Do I benefit that other people will get public education? Definitely. Okay. Definitely, I do benefit.
Well, I mean, the benefit is just that you also, like, in the end, you get to live in this like high functioning society.
Exactly.
Which is like, the value of that is like immeasurable, you know?
Exactly. It's like, so it's because what's the alternative? Like, what if, okay, without having it, sort of even 10 or 20% of people would be illiterate or something like that, ended up being illiterate without having public education, right? How would that affect my life negatively? Well, multitudes of ways, right? So probably the crime rates would go up, because in current societies, if you're illiterate, there is absolutely nothing or very little productive things you can do. So there's a whole lot of things that is, for me as an individual, it would make sense for me to support this, and that's what I'm going to do. It's like, if someone, I don't know, right now it's like every major party, or like every party is of course for public education, so this is not like an issue. But if someone wasn't, right, then I would never vote for them, right? And that would make sense for me.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, I know what you mean, like when you said like this brilliance of democracy in that sense, like totally agree. But of course, it's also well, I think that the misconception about democracy is that it is like, the brilliance of it is that it also, I mean, the problem is like, it doesn't really matter how you try to organize a society, like it's always going to be really messy.
Of course, yes.
And this kind of democratic way of doing it, for me, is just the least messy way, I would say.
Yes. And I think even though it's very hard in democracy to have some kind of accountability, because the elections are like every 4 years, or some feedback loops, but at least they are somewhat possible. Okay, they are somewhat possible, and they are more possible.
Wait, are you saying the elections being each, like, only after 4 or 5 years is a good thing or a bad thing right now?
I think it's so because of practical reasons.
But I think it's also like works a little bit against our interest in having these elections so frequently, because it's like there's no incentive to kind of think beyond,
because the public
like, the
feedback,
next 4 years.
Yeah, because there's a delay in the public feedback, and the public feedback loop, or like the feedback loop in democracy when governing democratic state, it's just too slow. I think that's the main issue. And having these rare elections, it's now it has upsides, mainly that, okay, well, it costs less compared to having
the elections are
elections
not
more
rare
often.
though, right? I mean, 4 years is not rare, is it?
Yeah, you could say, but I mean, if you had it every week, every year, then then the loop would be faster.
True, but I think if you had it every year, it would also be impossible to accomplish anything.
Yeah, so the stability would be perhaps suffer. Or maybe
Yeah,
you'd
but because I
accomplish more.
think
We don't know. We haven't
I
tried
don't
it
know,
out.
like, yeah, I'm just speculating. It's like if you're like, let's say you're a prime minister and you have a year and it's the first time you do the job, and like probably takes you like 7 months to figure out how the system of like how all of this infrastructure
Yeah,
actually
but if you
works.
don't do something bad, then why shouldn't you get the same election results in a year, in the next year?
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Exactly. It's like, so if you're
I mean, yeah, you could
moving
also
towards
have
the
like
things
this
you promised,
mandatory, like,
yeah,
you don't even have to have an election. You could just have like a referendum every year. Like, do you want to keep the prime minister or do we want to have an election?
exactly. It's like, well, you could go even further, right? You could, so what you could do is, so in Estonia we have e-voting, right? So you could just log in to your state account, or like this internet account in yours for your state, right? And then they just change who you support currently.
Oh, you
Currently,
can
I
have like this
support
kind of
that guy.
dynamic parliament. So if like one
Yeah,
party
exactly. And
does
so
like a
if
major fuck up, you can just,
if the coalition does a major fuck up or tries to push through something that they shouldn't be pushing through, then all of a sudden they don't have the right voting power anymore to push it through. People just change immediately, and so they
that
are
could be
like, they can
interesting.
still
It's
be
like, it's
in,
because then
they
parties
can
get
still be
into
in
power and
coalition.
then there's,
Yeah, but then all of a sudden they are a minority coalition, and so they're like, okay, we have to give in. All right, maybe we have to make some agreements with someone else.
yeah, that would be cool. I mean, it's also
some kind of
interesting. It's like, because then
just
if you
birth.
have like a major vote in the parliament or something, you would in a way make it really direct also, because the
Yeah,
people would just sort of like, if the majority of the people are against some legislation that is going to be passed, they will just, you know,
yeah.
change
I
the
think the
composition
main
day before. And
Hmm. I think the main criticism of that is that the most people currently yet are not so internet aware, or or especially the older generations, that they would not sign in and change
yeah,
the
I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a main problem with it. I think you could also, you know, it would require, in order for those continuous decisions to be informed, you would require a very attentive electorate, and you would also require a very highly organized media media like industry
Yeah,
that is
I think
sort
this
of
is a
very
topic I
much
want to
looking out for
discuss.
the interests of the people.
Yeah, I think this is a topic I want to discuss later on. But I think for today we have to start wrapping it up.
Maybe just 2 minutes on cohesion and cooperation.
Um, yeah,
You don't have to, but
these are these are of course very important things, like societies that are able to uh, have a good cooperation, they thrive, right? And so it's like, I think
yeah,
what
I
is
mean, conflict
what could
management is
happen potentially.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, so what can happen potentially in this capitalistic, super capitalistic society is that that you have this fragmentation of sort of uh, fragmentation of people because of their, well, as an individuals they grow apart, and so you will have at some point tensions, you have some cohesion issues, And I think that's you can see that in like United States right now, where the society there is a lot more polarized, and they are like naturally a super like very liberal, very right-leaning state. And so you could say that, okay, now we see that there are some cohesion, that like serious cohesion issues, right?
But of course, with the United States, what's very interesting is that they have like even the controversial parts of their constitution, like the Second Amendment, for example, is really,
that's the gun rights, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm really under the opinion that the Constitution itself is like fantastic. Like even the controversial parts are extremely noble, actually. But they are almost so noble that it's impossible to live up to it because everyone is so flawed. So, like, I mean, this idea that, okay, like, we give the right for everyone to bear arms so that when we have this tyrannical government, or if we ever should have this tyrannical government, then the amount of people that will have arms will be so much bigger than what the army could ever be, that the tyrannical government will be immediately overthrown.
Yeah.
But of course, what happens is that when you give the right for people to have arms, it's just like people shooting themselves in the foot and massive gun violence and, you know, total disaster, basically.
They did not have automatic assault rifles when they wrote this constitution, by the way.
Yes, exactly. And they didn't have walls.
They had the flintlock rifles, which was one shot, then 50 seconds of loading.
Yeah, and you couldn't buy it 24/7 if you drive 5 minutes to a Walmart, you know? It's like, what the fuck is this?
And so, okay, I'll do it really short, because this is also a very interesting topic, because warfare itself has changed so dramatically since this constitution was written.
Yeah.
The assumptions of the capacity that even those, if everyone had armed and then they could like fight some tyrannical government, assumptions at that moment, hell, that was true. Nowadays, I am not so sure, because of the technological possibilities in warfare.
I totally
the dynamics
understand.
are completely different.
I agree, but still, behind all of these technological capabilities are people in the end.
Yes.
And if you can somehow overthrow the people, you can also find new people to kind of be in charge of these technological capabilities. And I think if there really was like this mass upbringing in the States, you know, overthrowing the White House, as well guarded as it is, would be pretty easy.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, it's like, why would you stay in the White House then? It's like, besides, it's right now, if you're talking about, yeah, it's because I think like communication is so much more important right now in the modern warfare, because it can be instantaneous. And if one side, for example, loses the ability to instantaneously talk,
yeah,
then the disadvantage will be so huge. So that means if, for example, you can have as many arms in the population as
okay.
as
So
possible,
what you're essentially saying is that
if the state is able to, for example, take away your internet connection, okay, your sort of revolution it's gone. That's it. Okay, because
so
your
I mean,
opponent
I
are
guess,
still able to communicate.
Yeah, so at this point, the state has so much power that the revolution will never happen.
Well, I'm not saying it, but it's just, I'm saying that if you want to have the same assumptions, then it's tremendously more complex.
Yeah,
It's a lot
well,
more
for
complex
sure. Yeah,
than just having firearms. Okay, that's what I'm saying.
yeah. I mean, I agreed. Although I think the complexities 200 years ago were also quite significant.
Yeah,
I mean, you could
I
also
think,
argue that the fact that it was so difficult to communicate with everyone, the communication was always
yeah, but
so
it was equally
slow.
hard for everyone. It was also like
Yeah,
when
true.
they had the revolution against the British government, it was also hard for the British government to communicate with their officers in very very long distant places. Like it took often weeks and so on, right?
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
So it was
No,
hard for
that makes
everyone.
sense. Yeah, true. Anyway, no, I just found it
Okay.
interesting that the Constitution is like, yeah, it's so good that no one can live up to it in a way.
Well, okay. Yeah, maybe I should go through that as well. I only know some basic points about that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think the ramble was good. I think we didn't actually discuss the topic very much. We
No,
can
not
try
really.
do it some other time. And I think this direct democracy thing, I think this is something we should make a separate episode at some point as well, because I actually have quite a lot of thoughts about that and things that one should consider talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there's this the direct democracy thing is like, I would love to participate in something like that. At the same time, if I look at like the electorate as a whole, I'm not sure if I would want everyone to participate in this kind of system.
Oh no.
No, but come
I
on,
think there's okay.
there are people that vote. They decide in the voting booth based on some random remark someone once made to them at a bus stop.
It's
Um,
possible, yes.
so
But
it's
the
like
thing with
this kind of
random
a
remarks is
system would have to somehow like, you know, it demands also a electorate that is invested in the politics and invested in such a way that they are not only looking out for their own interests.
no, I mean, even if they would be able to look out for their own interest, right? Then that would already be a good thing. But I think
Well,
a lot of people are not able to look out for their own interests because the cost of understanding what is going on
that's what
is
I mean.
actually
Is
very
like,
high.
it's most exactly like, if what I guess what I mean is just like that you don't only have people looking out for like the immediate gain of one
Oh
law
yeah,
or
like
something
some
like this.
$10-$20 a month with some
Yeah, something like this. You know, that
yeah.
the it, I think it would probably work out even okay if everyone is looking for their own self-interest, but then the self-interests really have to be like cohesive in a way that it's not only the present moment, but you're
Yeah.
also like, as a self-interest, you're also taking into
Yes.
account like the future of your kids or like whatever.
Yes. And so that raises the question. Okay, so again, like being able to do such considerations is costly, and so I think one of the components that I want to discuss in the direct democracy part is how to build such systems, such societies, where these uh, costs are reduced to here I'm talking like time cost and the intellectual capacity costs and so on.
Yeah, or I mean, how to
Yeah,
also can also be that they're not maybe reduced, but just more time is made available to tackle these costs, right? So if you have like this massive automation of
that's good.
industrial
I
jobs,
think you have to do both. You have to do both.
yeah, I mean, obviously, it's always probably a combination of everything, right? But um, you know, like if you have this massive unemployment, then you can use that energy to have like this incredibly active electorate.
Oh yeah,
Somehow,
I'm not sure if that's a good thing, but okay. Anyways, let's wrap this up. Good ramble. Let's talk some other time.
Cool. Bye bye. Ciao.
Bye.